can go for hundreds of dollars if put on sale because there are a lot of collectors looking for these.
Okay, a few months ago, everyone, I did a special topic on a postcard called Dear Doctor. And if you haven't remembered it, check out this video right here. And the special topic is on Dear Doctor cards. They were drug company advertisements, but there's more to them. I'm going to be introducing Tom here. He's an expert in Dear Doctor postcard. He's been collecting over 40 years. He reached out to me and I was able to connect with him. And I'm excited for him to be here today and talk about these cards. So we learn a little bit more about them. And he's also just doesn't do postcards. He gets into stamps and everything else. So I'd like to introduce Tom here, and he's going to tell you his fields that he's an expert in and what he's done and his experience. And then we're going to talk about his website and Dear Doctor cards. Hello, Tom. How are you doing?
Hi, Mark. How are you doing today?
Good.
Thank you for the invite.
No problem. I'm excited.
By all means.
So go ahead and tell us about your experience. Spend some few minutes about your credentials. I see a lot of things on the side of you there, like you've been to a lot of shows.
I have been. Well, I guess let's start out at the very beginning. I am a philatelist. And a philatelist, compared to a deltiologist is somebody who's really big into postcards. A philatelist is a stamp collector. And the term philatelist actually means one who loves not paying taxes. And that goes back to the 1800s or so. It's a French word or so. But I have been a worldwide stamp collector since I was about 7 years old. And that's about 50 some odd years going on right now. But one of the areas that I've gotten into literally by accident was postcards. Now, of course, there's a good relationship between stamps and postcards because that's what they're made for. Postcards are meant to be mailed out with stamps and postmarks on it. And I would collect occasionally postcards, primarily looking at the stamps and the postmark itself, because that's what I would specialize in. But probably about 1980 or so, looking through some dealer junk boxes, I found these things that are now known as Dear Doctor cards. And what's a Dear Doctor card? Well, it's a piece of junk mail that a company would go ahead and mail on out to a prospective buyer of their products and services. And I picked up this card and said, this is really interesting. It was for a medicine called Pentothal. I had no idea what the medication was, but it started out and said, Dear Doctor, in this most exotic place of blah, 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 wherever the country happened to be, they use this medication and it'll help your patients too. Why don't you consider buying it, kind of thing. So it's true junk mail that I ran across. I said, well, this is kind of interesting. You look into a little further, and as is typically the case, you would find a couple of these cards mailed from very exotic countries around the world, in a lot of cases going to the same doctor, because this particular dealer happened to buy a lot from some other folks. And so I picked up some cards, 3 different cards from 3 different weird countries. I said, well, there's something to this. So you look into it, research it a little bit more, and come to find out somebody else had collected these. Another doctor had written an article a couple of years beforehand that I was able to dig into and find out a little bit of the history behind these cards. Again, they're called Dear Doctor cards because that's how they normally start out, with the salutation, Dear Doctor.
Yeah, when I found them, I found the name and I wrote it down. And then I started looking for them, and that's how I come up with this special topic, as I did some research on them. And I do have I think a few for sale, or I do have them here. How many did they send out?
Well, doing a little bit more research, this is through Abbott Laboratories, headquartered in Chicago. They started this mail campaign in 1956 and mailed cards out to doctors all the way up through 1968. And in their heyday, they mailed out about 250,000 cards to doctors from each of these locations. Very interesting. They had the money behind them, and it's cheap advertising. Who couldn't at least catch on to something if you get a card from a very exotic country and you've never seen the stamp before, you've never seen the postcard and the image on the other side, which typically has a something about that country, a site, people, normal doing everyday things in that particular country. It's a catchy gimmick, and it worked.
I noticed when I was looking at them, there were a lot of foreign,
Mm-hmm.
international.
Mm-hmm.
Is that where it started, or did it start in the States?
Well, these all were mailed not from the United States. The whole purpose was to try to get the attention of the doctors or the people receiving these cards. So they were mailed from other nations around the country to, at least I first thought, to doctors here in the United States. But looking a little further, they were sent to many other doctors around the world in their native languages too, and that's been kind of the fun to try to compile a listing of all of these things. Boy, did I have no idea what I was getting myself into. The original checklist that I had found that this other gentleman had put together were from about 30 different countries to dealers here in the US. I said, well, that's kind of nice, because by that time I had found at least 40 countries that these things had been mailed from to doctors here in the US. And then I discovered, oh, there are foreign language cards. And Abbott actually mailed some of these cards as well to other doctors in different countries and put the script in their particular language.
Wow.
So it kind of built on from there.
I read on your website, there was a huge mailing list they had.
Yes, indeed. Their mailing list, when they finally got into this, and the rest, as I mentioned, they had some cards that were mailed out, 250,000 cards to doctors around the world. And not only in English, as I mentioned, some of those 250,000 went to Germany in German. Portugal in Portuguese, and in other languages as well too, Spanish in particular.
There's no computers back in those days. Was this all done by hand?
Well, it basically was. I guess there's no other way around it. They had some good bookkeepers back then who kept track of all of these places and all the doctors' names and addresses and things like that too. Actually, this might be a good time for me to pull up one of my cards and kind of go over the anatomy of what we're talking about to give
Tom,
you and the viewers an idea of what's what.
Yeah, we love show and tell.
That be okay? This is a Dear Doctor card. So I'll kind of go over what I'll call the anatomy of a Dear Doctor card for you. Here's an example of one of the cards. This particular card was mailed in, actually it says 1954, but I discovered this is an error. The postmark should have been 1956. A batch of these cards is one of the varieties that I found, had the wrong year in the postmark. You can barely make it out here. I don't know if you can see my crosshairs now, but
yes,
that does say 4. It was actually mailed in 1956. The machine, they had the wrong year on that particular
Can I ask how
machine.
How you found out that it was 1956?
Well, yeah, I had a whole bunch of others that were from 1956, and happened to run across this one that said, oh, 1954. So one of these machines, since you've got, stop and think about it, if you have 200, let's say 200,000 cards went through a cancellation machine or so, you have to have more than one cancellation machine to get these things done in more than a month's time or so.
Hundreds, yeah.
So, right. So they have a lot of different machines, all with a similar slogan and postmark, as you can imagine. But sometimes even the post office slips up, as this particular case from Cuba did, and they had the wrong year slug, 1954 instead of 1956. So that's how we were able to find out. Now, in addition to that, over the years, I found a little more information that indeed confirms that Dear Doctor card starting from Abbott Labs in 1956 rather than 1954. So from that we can tell, oops, it's a post office mistake that made this. But let's just kind of show you a little bit about what's what here. Most Dear Doctor cards, let's start with the ones in English, as you see here. You will see most of them have a label on them, okay, a mailing label. compared to others that might have just been typed out or electrostamped in some way as far as the address. The card itself, these are native cards, which means these cards were actually printed and originated in their country of origin. This one is from Cuba. And if you were to go be in Cuba in 1956, this would have been one of the postcards you might have been able to get from one of the shops over there. However, Abbott went ahead and bought 200,000-ish or so of these cards from the producer of the cards and had them stamped with the particular text. And this is how most Dear Doctor cards start out with the word Dear Doctor. In some other cases, the text will be in English, but the salutation will be in the language of that particular country. So, for example, some of the South American cards might have started out saying instead of Dear Doctor, they would have had Dear Doctor in Spanish there. But we can show you some of those perhaps a little later on. But they're going to have a text, and in this particular case, you can see more than 2,300 reports in medical journals throughout the world have been published on intravenous anesthesia with pentothal sodium. And the message goes on. It says, again, doctors here like it. Your customers will kind of like it too. This is the typical kind of text that you'll find on all cards. Now, the text will be different from each of the different countries. Someone very creatively came up with the words and the plug, so to speak, that Abbott wanted for each of these cards. So you'll find a little different text in each of the different countries as you go through them.
Now, sodium pentothal that I read on your website, that's truth serum?
Yeah, that's it. Who would have imagined? This literally is truth serum. It is of a liquid form that would be injected into somebody to basically put them to sleep if they were to get have an operation or things like that. Or don't forget, this is the mid 1950s, the early 1960s. Don't forget, you had a lot of spying going on at that time, and thoughts of spies and the rest. So truth serum, if you mention that to almost anybody, they'll think, oh, that's what the spies used to kind of get information from that particular person. So yeah,
so
really interesting stuff.
So how did they come up with Dear Doctor, that salutation? Is that just something a marketing person?
Well, it's a marketing ploy, but when I looked into this a little further, Abbott was by far not the first company to dream up an idea and a scheme to send out postcards from foreign places to sell their ads and their products. We can go back to, the earliest card like this that I saw goes back to 1898, mailed from Japan. A drug company in New York, had a mailing from Japan to doctors and the rest back here in the United States to sell their particular pills, a medication pill that they had, which started out with the words, Dear Doctor. And I guess that's how you'd address any letter or postcard if you were mailing something to the doctor. Dear Doctor was kind of a natural thing. And that's how the name stuck with this particular type or these particular type of mailing cards.
So this typewritten here, I've seen different, some that is like written like in cursive, but it was stamped on there or whatever. And this is like a typewritten, so they can be different.
They indeed can be different. And as you mentioned, not all are typed. Some look like they're script. They're actually printed, but it looks like cursive writing on them. And there are some cards that all have the same text, but have different cursive writings on them. So there are some varieties. In fact, one of the cards has 4 different people must have cursively written out the same message. And the variety of those cards all went to doctors here in the U.S. So you can find varieties of just the cursive writing on some of these cards too.
The pictures on the scenes on the other side, the front side, but the pictures on the front, were they all the same or were they different across?
The cards, each batch used the same cards. But each of the cards are different because they were mailed from different countries around the
Okay.
world. In fact, let me pull up, if you don't mind, let me pull this down. Okay, so I've just gone to my website right now, and anybody can do this. You can do a search just for the words Dear Doctor in Google if you want, or you can just type out deardoctorpostcards.com.
And the link will be in the description of the video below too, as well. Not
Okay,
on the bottom of the
great.
screen.
That'll make it real easy for everybody. But
Yeah.
one of the things you'll want to check out first is something that's called the Abbott Cards and Varieties. Now, one of the projects, especially during the pandemic here, that I've always wanted to do, I never had the time to do it, but finally did, is add to my website, which has been around for about 10, 15 years or so,
Wow.
images of all of the known cards to date. And as of right now, there are 183 different cards through here. You'll see it as I scroll on down through everything here. I have these in alphabetical order by country, starting with Andorra. Going on down, you can see a variety of the cards. All the way down to cards from Wallis and Futuna Island that you'll see here, for example. You can click on any one of them, and you'll go to a page devoted for that particular country. You'll see a copy of the front, you'll see a copy of the reverse, and you can click on these two to enlarge them so you can get a little better picture of what each of them happen to look like.
Nicely done.
All right, so you can go back and do that.
So there was 182.
183 different cards that we have found.
Wow.
And when I say we, I've actually got a group of collectors who are hunting these down for me. And one guy in particular, Roger Chichos in Boulder, Colorado, is probably even more keen on these cards than I am. He's been one of the principal researchers of the cards and varieties and countries, and between he and I, we're usually finding new things almost all the time. The most recent card was found less than a year ago, so there are still more finds to be made out there, and some of these rarer cards can go for hundreds of dollars if put on sale, because there are a lot of collectors looking for these. Okay, as I mentioned, some cards can sell for a pretty penny. This happened to be a card. Yeah, we'll pull this one up. You can take a good look at that. And all the details are there. This is from eBay. And a lot of our cards and varieties can be found on eBay. And anybody who's watching this can do exactly the same thing. Take a look and see what happens to be available.
35 bids.
35 bids on this particular card. This is from French Polynesia, i.e. Tahiti. People will know that by. This was a discovery card. This was the very first card that was found from French Polynesia. Word got out to collectors that said, hey, a new card has come up. The person who found this said they wanted to try to make some money on it, put it up on eBay. And yes, back in 2010, you'll see 35 bids. This finally went for $158 and some change out on eBay. Why? Because it was a discovery card. Word got around, and if you're interested, there are buyers for these cards. Now, that's not the record for a card. Believe it or not, let's see if I can pull something else up here for you. Probably the highest record. I'm sorry you can't see this too well. Let me enlarge that a bit. Yeah, I'm sorry it's a little blurry here, but this is another eBay listing here from 2014. This particular card was one in Portuguese that was mailed to doctors in Brazil. That had 27 bids, another discovery copy. It went for $345. Now, you and probably everybody else is going to say, okay, what makes these things so valuable? Well, again, I guess going back to the anatomy of these cards, the things you want to look for in particular to know that you probably have something a little better than an average card. An average card you can sell from anywhere from $1 to maybe $5 each. What you want to look for cards that may not be in English. That's probably a first clue that you've got a card that's probably better than some others. Number two, you want to see if you can find a card from a very exotic or unknown place. A card from Canada, and yes, Canada had a whole bunch of cards. Italy, Western Europe, Germany, Spain, France issued many cards came from there, but not too many cards came from places like Antarctica or, as we looked earlier, the Wallis and Futuna Island or Pitcairn Island or some other such smaller, really dinky countries, if you will. Those would be more desirable than cards that came from more well-known countries is probably the best way to put it. So those are some simple things to kind of look for that to know that you probably have a little better card. And one more thing too, Abbott sent out two different sets of cards, one from about 1956 going to about 1961-ish, 1962. And then they had another set of cards that were issued between 1964 to about 1968. What's unique about that particular mailing is they were mailed mostly to nurses.
Nurse?
Now, the salutation to nurses, yeah. The salutation won't be Dear Doctor to those cards, but they will say instead, Dear Nurse Anesthetist, or words to that effect. Or, in some cases, will have no salutation at all. It'll just come in with the message.
Okay.
That mailing between 1964 and 1968 is where you'll find the majority of the better priced cards, because not nearly as many cards went to the nurses than did the first mailing of doctors. I mentioned earlier, I mean, the doctor cards were 250,000 mailings at a time. I've never been able to figure out or determine exactly how many cards went to nurses in this second group of mailing, but it was a much smaller mailing list. That means there are fewer cards, much more desirable to people who really get into Dear Doctor cards from the collecting perspective.
When those were mailed the first run, those years that they ran them, I would expect, like that one with the postmark you found was 1954, but it's 1956. They all pretty well have the same postmark.
Yes and no. And that's, as a philatelist, that's another interesting area and interesting varieties that that we would collect. As I mentioned in the earlier part of the discussion of the Cuban card, again, when you're mailing that number of cards out, you have to have lots of machines that go ahead and put and cancel the stamps on them. Not all of the cancellation devices are the same. There may be a separate letter, in particular Singapore used a series of cancellation devices that they lettered from A to the letter J. So you'll find a letter A, you'll find a letter J, you'll find a letter C in the postmark. Those are all different varieties that someone who gets into these cards and is looking for varieties in particular will be looking for those variants.
With your website, you said you've got it, what, 10 to 12 years?
I have to stop and think about how long I've had my website up, but it's been at least 15 years probably that I've had the website up, continuing to try to increase the information on there. And another thing that's on the website, I have my master checklist that your viewers will probably be interested in. In fact, maybe I can go ahead and pull that up right now. This is my master spreadsheet. When you go to my webpage, look for, let me see the actual wording that I've got on there right now. It'll just say checklists. Click on where it says checklists, and you will then go ahead and see, pull up a copy of my Excel checklist. I'll kind of take you through that briefly here too. But here's the start of the Abbott section from the country Andorra. This is the what you'll find on the cancellation itself. Here's a description of what it depicts, what the postcard itself depicts. What does the salutation say? It says doctor, in this case, Dear Doctor. The message is in script rather than typed, as we talked about a little earlier. The address was put on by a label rather than a script. And here are the various dates that we have been able to find that these cards were mailed on. Since there are so many again, 200,000 plus cards. Not all cards have the same mailing date. Some do, some don't.
Okay.
But in this particular case, for the Andorra card number one, we have the cards that went out in 1958, everywhere from July 21st to August 10th. Then looking at it a little bit further, you can see here's the values of the postage stamps that were used on them. And there are some variety of stamps. Not all the same stamps were used as well. And you'll see that kind of information for all the various cards. And again, for card number one, here are the various countries that the cards have been found mailed to. To Canada in English, one to the Netherlands in English, to Belgium in French, and you can go down the list. So that's what we've been able to find so far on card number one of the various countries that these have gone to. We have found that Dear Doctor cards, in fact, you'll see that very much in the introduction to my web page. There's 183 face different cards that have been found, and many, many, many varieties from Abbott. And those have been found so far in 10 different languages: Arabic, wow, Dutch, English, French, German, Greek, Italian, Portuguese, Spanish, and Swedish. And they were sent to, from what we've been able to find so far, 37 different countries and territories. And you'll notice in here Puerto Rico. Yes, Puerto Rico is part of America, but I consider that a different territory here. And if you want to get into territories in that as well too, we're including Hawaii in there as a country and territory, because when these cards went to Hawaii, they weren't part of the United States yet. They weren't officially a state.
Very detailed. You guys have done a lot of good work.
It's been many, many years, and anyone can join the Dear Doctor Club, if you will. Just go ahead and send me your name, your email address, and when I put updates to the website, whether it be my postcard listing or have some new information of new cards that have been found or things like that, I'll pop you all an email so that you have the latest and greatest information available. Your viewers might be interested a little bit more the historical end of these Dear Doctor cards. Abbott was not the first company to dream up this scheme. As I mentioned, one of the earliest ones dates back to 1896 from Japan that came on over, but other companies, drug companies, especially European drug companies, use this same kind of scheme to send out postcards with interesting views on them to their doctor clientele. Many of them were from French and German companies. In fact, there's a nice set from a company called Fournier that issued postcards from France depicting various scenes of France up until they joined World War I, and then they came out with views and pictures of battle scenes from the French forces that came out through there. I'll pull one up so you can kind of get a better view of one of them. There we go. And let me enlarge that a bit as well too.
That's nice.
There's a beautiful card showing French forces, again, in their campaign of 1914 to 1915, very early part of World War I. That on the other side is a Dear Doctor card, again, about their particular drug that they're selling to doctors. Here on the battlefield, our doctors are using our medication, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Beautiful cards. I've seen these things sell for well into the $100 plus range. But this whole idea and scheme of sending out interesting postcards to grab the attention of doctors is not a new one.
Okay.
And there are other companies, as well that did these. Abbott is the one that I somewhat concentrate on, but my master spread list lists many other drugs over the years, drug companies that have issued cards along this. Dumex is another major player when it comes to cards along these lines. Their particular cards were mailed out in the late 60s, early 70s, have more modern views and images to them. This one in particular is kind of nice, showing a sheikh, a soldier in the Middle East with his garb and all the rest. But You name the topic, you can probably find it on a Dear Doctor card, I guess is the best way to put it in that regards.
Mm.
La Biomorine is a French-based firm, sent out tons of cards. Mead Johnson has a nice group of cards. If anybody collects fish,
Fish.
there you go. I know I have some fishing things back there and tropical fish in the background there, Mark. I remember this in particular and wanted to make sure I showed you these as well too. But this is card number 1 of a series all about fish that this particular company sent out to advertise their particular drugs. Really, really neat. I'm still trying to build that set, by the way. I had thought that there were only 16 up to that point, but I've just recently, in the last couple of weeks, found a card marked number 19
Really?
with a barracuda on it. So there's much more to be learned about these cards, both front and back. You can see I've got some samples of what some of the images look like there. And let's see if I can do a different view, make them a little larger for you there, just to give you an idea on the diversity of some of the cards. These were very creative ideas that people put together. Again, just to grab the attention of the receiver and read the message on the back. I'll pull one of them up just to show you. There you go. This is their fish liver oil is what Mead Johnson issued these cards all about and for. So as you'll note, here you are, doctor. And they use some kind of mimeograph machine or something to put the address on each of these cards. Mailed from their headquarters. You'll see here this is a pre-cancel stamp from Evanston, Indiana. And this stamp was issued in 1938. So somewhere between about late 1930s, early 1940s is when this set of cards was mailed out. So something a little different, but also a Dear Doctor card. There's that salutation again, Dear Doctor.
It just makes you wonder, as a reseller, more than a collector, how many of these things went through our hands that we missed.
Sure.
And you only know what you know. And when I did the Dear Doctor, I said, okay, this is just a few cards out here. And then when you reached out and I looked at your website, I said, oh my God, I got to talk to them. It's just amazing. Now, when you said, we talked about on the phone, a little bit off of Dear Doctor for a second, I don't want to mess it up. You said you were a judge on stamp exhibits?
Yeah. As I mentioned, I'm very big into stamp collecting. In fact, you'll see part of my worldwide collection behind me here. And looking on the other side, I have some of the badges that I've worn at the various stamp shows that I've judged at. I am a nationally accredited judge by the American Philatelic Society, the big society of stamp collectors here in the U.S., as well as the American Topical Association, stamp collectors that deal with particular themes or subjects and collect only that subject, like sports or animals or things like that. That's another very big group here. But I have been a judge since 1999. I am invited to shows around the country where we have exhibits, and postcards is included with stamp exhibits. So I have had to educate myself, favorably so, all about postcards and learn about postcards and the various types of postcards, the old postcards, and their varieties and the rest.
Okay. Now with cancels, I don't dabble in the stamp world. That's one black hole I don't want to go into. Not that I don't like it, it's just so much. I'm so busy with postcards.
Sure.
Some of the things I look for is RPOs, cancels, RFDs. So I get in my videos, I do some things where the stamp, someone will put in their title, this postcard, then they put in there 1B Franklin. What is a 1B Franklin?
1 cent Ben Franklin stamp. They're talking in that particular case about a 1 cent stamp that's considered a definitive stamp. Definitive stamps are like flag stamps are today. They're the ones that you'll see the most of when you go in the post office. They'll give you kind of the bland kind of stamps that show a flag on them. Well, back in the day, early 1900s, and even before then, you'll find dead presidents on there. Washington and Franklin are probably the two biggest ones that you'll find on these definitive stamps that were issued even back then in the hundreds of millions of those particular designs that were issued.
Yeah, so when we look at the cancel codes, so is a 1B Franklin, I mean, these people, I don't know anything about them, but is it worth the big bucks they put on these things? On the back, a lot of people say that I missed the stamps on the back of the postcards, and I told them, I said, go for it.
Well, when it comes to the stamps themselves, there's a lot of stamps that will kind of look the same, but what sets apart perhaps a stamp that has a value of maybe 5 cents versus one that might be a variety, a very rare variety, and sell for $5,000, you have to know a little more about the stamps. Earlier stamps come in what are called different perforations. You know, the edges on a stamp, the little edges there. Well, we can actually measure those, and they went through various cycles of perforation, what we call perforation gauges. And that will set one type of stamp that looks exactly the same, printed the same way, from another variety of the stamp.
Yeah, because a lot of people ask me
it can get really complicated.
Yeah, that's why
really
every time I put my foot in there, I said, I'll leave that up to the guys. They can buy my $5 postcard and get that stamp all they want.
Let's invite everybody to the Chicago PEX show.
Yes.
I know we had started talking about judging the rest, but my next judging assignment is going to be in about a month's time in Chicago. Well, a suburb of Chicago, Itasca, Illinois. There is going to be a very big show, one of about 30 national shows that are held around the country each year. And I've just received my judging listings there. There is going to be some 256 frames of material, not only stamps, but also postcards. There will be a couple postcard displays there, which I know postcard collectors in particular will want to go to and take a look to see what an exhibit all about postcards is all about and what you can do along those lines.
And that's, like I said, that's only a little over an hour for me. And I used to go to school up there and work up in that area. I'm going to be at Itasca to see you, and I'm going to see if I can bring the camera in and on my backpack and let people know what these shows are. A lot of people, younger ones, have shied away from the shows because they can go online and buy stuff and that. But what I found is going to these shows is important. So I'll put a link to that down in my video description as well.
Mm-hmm.
We also talked about something the other day. I had a quick conversation with Tom before we did this video, and we got into different things. I was excited to talk to him. And I said, I never sent anything in for grading. And I told you about that Santa card I had. I had some marks on it. And you said with grading, it's not more about what's on it, it's the condition of the card. Could you speak a little? So if I had this card and I sent it in for grading, what would they look at?
Well, I guess the whole history of grading probably started, or at least really accelerated, with baseball cards. That was the very first thing that I'm aware of that people decided, well, I've got to get it graded. I want to make sure I have a perfect card here. And the more perfect a card happens to be, the more potential money would be involved as far as if you were to go ahead and sell that. The same things happened with stamps. And now the same thing is happening with postcards. As we had discussed earlier, it's not necessarily the image that is on a postcard, or for that matter, a stamp, or a baseball card. All right, you can have a Babe Ruth card, okay, a very expensive Babe Ruth card. Send it on in, and the only thing the graders are going to look at is the condition of the paper, perhaps the way it was printed, how centered that particular image is on the paper itself. They want to make sure there are as few as possible any kind of breaks in the ink, cracks in the paper, folds, bends, nicks, things like that. That's the only thing a grader is going to look at. They're not necessarily going to pay attention to what's pictured on the front or back of whatever it is that happens to get graded. They're really looking just at the condition of the piece itself. For someone who's interested in selling cards, postcards or stamps or baseball cards, that is the thing. And people are getting ridiculous prices for the most basic things. I know I had mentioned to you, Mark, there's a stamp that you can pick up for about 2 cents, a used stamp back from the 1930s. I would give 5 cents, maybe 10 cents if I particularly needed it. Again, it's one that hundreds of millions were printed. Guy went ahead and got it graded. It got a perfect score of 100. Right, which is the highest grade that you can get in the stamp world when it comes to grading.
Okay.
Baseball cards and postcards, I think, will be graded on a 10-point scale.
Okay.
If I remember correctly. But this particular stamp got 100. It's the best centered. The edges are all perfectly fine. The printing is fine on it. And a dealer is trying to sell it for $350. I wouldn't pay, even in that condition, I wouldn't pay maybe more than $1 for it.
Yes.
But there are going to be people out there who want the best of the best. It's kind of a guarantor for the buyer and seller that, yes, this is the best grade or this is a top grade, so you should pay top dollar or pay top dollar for that particular piece.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen a lot of graded cards and stuff, and there's postcards are graded too.
Mm-hmm.
And out there. And I just did a video on little spoiler, but the Holiday Inn, Mickey Mantle Holiday Inn.
Ooh.
There's a postcard that has been graded because he put his name on, let him put his name on one. And that's
Nice.
that's the Holiday Inn card I look for. But I never found one. But yeah, I think
Well, I guess going back to my spreadsheet, again, encourage everyone when you get a chance to go to the website and particularly pull down the Excel spreadsheet, because I've got some figures here too. As of right now, I have 11,216 reviewed cards. A lot of them are just from online and things like that. But when I go to shows, I'll write down what I've seen and things like that. And well over 3,000 different cards from different manufacturers. I created a monster is the best way to put it. There is just so much involved to when it comes to Dear Doctor cards and the variants.
a lot more than I thought.
A lot more than I ever imagined. So
yeah, when I did that video, it was a quick part of it because I didn't know a lot about it. I'm really glad that you reached out, and
you bet.
And I'm sure I might have some questions, but everybody go to deardoctorpostcards.com, and Tom's got a little thing to click on there. So, send your name and stuff, and let me come from SM Postcards. And you got any questions and about Dear Doctor, I'm sure he probably has the answer, guys.
Well, I'll at least try to come up with an answer for you. Let's put it that way. My email address is all the way at the bottom of the website. You'll find it. You'll be able to go hold me. I'd certainly welcome anyone to send me any questions, comments, or if you happen to find some card that you think might really be something special, send them my way, send an image. I'll be happy to give you an idea of what's what, and you may be the next person to find a new variant of the Dear Doctor card and make a fortune.
Slot on the spreadsheet, like a star on the wall.
Absolutely, yes. We'll include you up on the spreadsheet. You bet.
I appreciate Tom's time. I'm excited to have somebody with that much knowledge to come on and tell us about this and his background in stamps. That just something I never do, as you guys know, but he's explained a few things, and especially the grading part, which is very new to me. But I appreciate all the time, Tom, and all the work you've done. And I hope everybody goes out there and signs up and get some traffic to the website and look around and learn more about these Dear Doctor cards. I want to hear from you guys about some of the sales or finds.
You bet. Sharing our information is knowledge, and knowledge is power, and power is when you can make some bucks.
I could probably share most of mine in about 10 minutes.